All right, schedules of theories of reinforcement. This is chapter 7 that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about there's various ways that these schedules of reinforcement happen. We have the basic 4, and then we have some expanded ones. But in order for individuals to understand that the behaviors, the desirable behaviors, the behaviors we want to increase, they need to participate in those behaviors. We have to reinforce them on a schedule. You can either do a continuous schedule reinforcement, which means we give a reward every time the person responds or does the desired behavior, or when they do a specific desired behavior, or we do what we call intermittent or partial reinforcement, which we reinforce some of the responses that we want to see increase. The difference between continuous and intermittent is really on the strength and the continuation of the behaviors, us seeing the behaviors happening. So if you think about it, think if you have a younger brother or sister, niece or nephew or a child, and you want them to do a very desirable behavior, which allows them to let me get this person in. It allows them to participate in some very good behavior. Say cleaning up their room. All right. So if we every time they cleaned up their room, we gave them a reward. They may get tired of that reward because they get the same reward every single time. If we rewarded them not every time they cleaned up the room, maybe every third time, fourth time, or on average, with a reward that they find rewarding, then we may see a more steady state of their behaviors, because their behaviors will won't the reward won't become less rewarding for them. So as a result, doing an intermittent or partial reinforcement schedule, that tends to allow behaviors to not become I shouldn't say behaviors, I said not rewards, not to become boring or less rewarding, less reinforcing. So it's always important to remember what's rewarding for the person that you're trying to increase their behavior with. We have to find out what makes them jazzy, what makes them excited about things. And we need to use that reward, but we need to use the reward sparingly and appropriately in order to increase the likelihood of that behavior continuing, being appropriate. I had a student who a couple of years ago said they were having difficulties with their child and their behaviors, and they wanted to really get them to display more positive behaviors. And they kind of resorted to punishment, spanking or scolding. And I told them, I said, if the inappropriate behaviors are harmful, or, on the extreme of being undesirable, sometimes punishment is deemed necessary. But you have to remember, punishment only suppresses the behavior. What you really want to do is reinforce the behaviors that you want to see out of your child. And I asked them, what was rewarding for them? What did their child really love to do or really liked a lot? And they said reading. I said, aha, there you go. I said, develop a reading library with some of their favorite books, or books that you think they would be interested in, but they can only access them a certain time, a certain amount of time a day, or certain amount of books based upon the desired behaviors you want to see. If it means that they had a very good day at school, or they didn't talk back, or they cleaned up their room, then you can use the textbook library, the home textbook library, as a reward. Now, the reward is different because each book is different, different genres, different kinds of things, and the child loved reading. And so even though it was the same reward every time, the reward actually was changing because it was a different type of reading, a different type of book, from comic books to mystery models to true stories, whatever that they had placed in the library. So the key element is to remember what is reinforcing for the individual. What is reinforcing for the individual, okay? So we have several types of schedules of reinforcement. And I think I might have said this, I might have said it in Psych 100 because I was teaching the same thing last week in Psych 100. But an easy way to remember the makeup of the schedule reinforcement is there are ratios and intervals and fixed and variable. If we take the ratio, which is R, stands for R, and if we take the interval, which is I stands for interval, ratio always means that you're going to respond or you're going to do something. So whatever in front of ratio is, you'll see it's going to be a fixed number of responses or a variable number of responses. And then interval, we're referring to time, the passage of time, seconds, minutes, hours. So it'd be a fixed amount of time or varied on average amount of time needs to pass before the person is rewarded. So ratio means to do or to respond, and interval is related to time, like the clock. And then we have fixed and variable, just like it sounds. Fixed is stable, solid, no variation, and variable means it varies on average in terms of the response. So B.F. Skinner is probably the most highly known person in terms of schedules of reinforcement. He's the one who really developed the idea behind schedules of reinforcement out of Thorndike's work and a number of others. And always remember, reinforcement, when we're doing reinforcers and reinforcement, we're trying to increase behavior. We're trying to increase the behavior that we are seeing, okay? So we talk about reinforcement is contingent, which means it is based upon or it's going to happen based upon what we do on a fixed or predictable number of responses. So oftentimes when you see this in applied behavioral analysis, behavior modification, which is the old name for applied behavioral analysis, it will be abbreviated FR and a number, FR5, FR10, FR15, FR20, which means that the person or animal that we are rewarding, they must do a fixed number of responses, 5 responses, 10 responses, 20 responses before they get their reward. So it's on a fixed ratio, a fixed number of responses. So generally, this produces a high rate of responses with short breaks in between kind of the rewards. And we have kind of a slowly kind of increasing response. Then we have a rapid response. Often it comes right before the reward. And oftentimes when we are rewarding the person, we need to look at what the reward is and how we are going to produce the reward, okay? So the reinforcer, the reward has to be, we sometimes refer to it as being a dense reward or a lean reward. And when we were referring to a dense or a lean reward, we're referring to basically how the person sees the reward, the reward, how reinforcing, how rewarding it is for them. Is it something that gets them really jazzed, or is something they feel kind of mediocre with? We also talk about this concept of stretching the ratio. Okay. So moving from something that's kind of low rewarding to something that's maybe high rewarding in the schedule. And we do this gradually, because the more dense, the more rapid responding that we often will have. Okay. But the thing we have to watch out for is burnout. And that burnout with the reward is essentially the individual or the animal will just get tired of the reward in general. They'll be like, this is no longer rewarding. I get it so much that now I don't want it any longer. That would be kind of what the burnout would be when we talk about the reward patterns for fixed ratio. Okay. Burnout is the same as ratio strain. So, if the reward is, how can I say, if the reward is, like I said, if it's just the same old, if it's too difficult in terms of reaching the reward, then the animal or the person will not go for it. They won't stretch themselves for the reward. So we have to make the reward something that is attainable, something that's meaningful, and something that the person can enjoy in relationship to increasing that behavior that we are using on the fixed ratio response. Some level of money, some richness. And I think mainly because my cousin and I were talking about this this weekend, is that my mother's family, because my cousin's mother is my mother's youngest sister and she's still alive. They grew up during the Depression. So it's kind of like what's happening with people now, because we could say we're in they talk about a recession, but the Depression was even worse than a recession. Many people around the United States lost everything, didn't have anything. People were on rations. And my mother's family was already poor to an extent. Her father was able to work even through the Depression, but still the whole country was going through it. And this is how the start of social services happened with FDR after the Depression. This is why we have SNAP and unemployment and all those kinds of services that help people when they are unemployed in the United States due to that regime and due to the Depression. And so my mom liked to play the lottery. And of course, we didn't have lottery here in Hawaii, but when we lived in Ohio, my mom played the lottery. And the lottery in the mainland, in most states, they have the Mega Millions. Maybe you all heard of the Powerball, the Mega Millions, where individuals, you can randomly pick your numbers, or you can pick your numbers, and they spit out a slip of paper with the numbers that you pick. And then you wait for the lottery commission to put all these numbers in a big ball, like a bingo circle ball, and they spit them out. They randomly spit out the numbers. And they do it on a weekly basis. Sometimes I don't know which one, the Powerball, I know the Powerball and the Mega Millions, I don't know if they happen once a week, but then they have numbers where you can pick 3 numbers or 4 numbers or 5 numbers every day. They have lottery number games where you can pick a certain number of numbers, and they pull them maybe twice a week. They have various variable ratio schedules where they do these lottery games, but you can't win unless you buy a lottery ticket. So because hence ratio, you have to do something. In this case, you have to buy a lottery ticket. So the key here with variable ratio is that People consistently will buy lottery tickets because they consistently want a chance to win, because we don't know when our numbers will pop up, when those magical numbers that I've chosen, 3 numbers, 4 numbers, 5 numbers, or 6 numbers, or 7 numbers, plus the Mega Millions, or the Power Play, which is an additional number you can guess at, that will give you some additional monies if you win, or if you have that number alone. But in order to get reinforced with the lottery tickets, you have to respond, and hence you have to buy the ticket and pick your numbers. But we don't know when. I don't know, as a lottery ticket purchaser, when I will get my Mega Millions or my Powerball, or my numbers will come up. They come up at a variable rate, a variable amount of responses, of numbers that get spit out of the air machine. Why do I continue doing this? Because there's evidence someone has won. A lot of times with a variable ratio schedule, with any of the schedules of reinforcement, there's always an initial reinforcement of the behavior that we want to reinforce. So people won the lottery. There's been documented that people have won the lottery. We see it when some states you have to announce that you won the lottery. In some states, you don't have to announce that you've won the lottery. Most states require the winner to be on TV, getting their, the big fake check, saying that they're the lottery winner. And there's pros and cons with that as well, because depending on how much you win, people may try to scam you. You may develop relatives that you never knew about, and all these kinds of things. And I think for some of the people who have been the big winners, some people have had difficulties and issues. Matter of fact, there's a whole TV show called The Lottery Ruined My Life. And it talks about people who won the lottery and how the lottery didn't bring them as much happiness as they thought it would winning the lottery. Mostly all gambling is based upon variable ratio schedules of reinforcement. It accounts for maladaptive behaviors, because once you start responding, there's very little attrition, there's very little ratio burnout, or ratio strain with a variable ratio schedule, because the reward is so rewarding at the end that people will continue to participate in the behavior. So if you've ever been to the 9th island, or people would like to go to the 9th island because they like to gamble, they like to do the various slot machines, roulette, all those kinds of things. They're participating in this variable ratio type of behavior. And like I said, it can be very problematic because of how reinforcing it is. The behavior may be reinforced to a point where it's maladaptive for the individual. Okay. Now we have fixed interval. So now we're going back to the fixed, stable, a solid interval, responding, rewarding, and it's based upon time. Now, your reward is based upon a fixed and predictable period of time. So if you think of this, you think of your paycheck. You get your paycheck at a fixed amount of time every week. It may be once a week. It may be every the 15th of the month or the 30th of the month. It may be once a month, but you get it at a fixed interval of time. A fixed amount of time passes before you get your paycheck. However, your paycheck can also be a fixed ratio response as well. Because if your paycheck, the amount of money you get in your paycheck is dependent on how many hours you work or how many things you produce, then it would be a fixed ratio schedule versus a fixed interval schedule. The fixed interval schedule with your paycheck is no matter how many hours you work, no matter how much work you do, you're going to get a paycheck. So fixed interval schedule, when we graph it, has what we have is a scalloping effect. And the scalloping effect means that closer to the time that, say, for instance, you're going to get paid, you may work a little bit more diligently, a little bit more harder because you know you're getting ready to get paid. The example that your book used was procrastination, how you get your syllabus at the beginning of the semester and it lays out when certain things are going to be due. Say, for instance, we had a midterm and the midterm was cumulative, that everything from the beginning of the class to the midterm of the class would be included on the exam. You may not necessarily study every week, but you may study in burst, especially if I say there's going to be a pop quiz around the things that that's going to be on the midterm. So you're going to get a pop quiz occasionally. The pop quiz would be kind of a variable ratio schedule. You don't know when the quiz is, but you have to be there. You have to do the quiz in order to get the information and get the points. So say, for instance, you didn't have pop quizzes, but you knew you were going to have a midterm. You may do some studying here and there, but closer to the time of the midterm, you may really start to get yourself together and start studying. So we see a burst of activity. And after a long pause of no activity. So you kind of procrastinated, maybe came to class, occasionally. Hopefully you don't do that. You come to class all the time. But if in the case you did do that, because some classes people do that, depending on what the topic is and how interesting the topic is. But you may start attending class more when it's closer to the time of an exam or closer to time of something that's due. So this is what, when we talk about a fixed interval in terms of example, this is a good example in terms of procrastinating. And we all procrastinate. I'm a big procrastinator. I have an illusion of being organized. I procrastinate and then sometimes I just get it done. Procrastination is a study style, by the way. Then we have variable interval scale. So the variable interval scale means that over a certain amount of time, you're going to get a certain reward. So oftentimes there's a reward on average at the beginning of the reinforcement stage. So with all these reinforcement schedules, you have to reward the person that you want the behavior to increase at the very beginning, or they won't get that they need to be participating in this behavior based upon rewards. Okay. Think of classical conditioning, the associating the bell with the food. We have to do the association to get the animal to realize that they have to pay attention to this particular thing in order for them to respond. So the same thing with rewards. You have to have some kind of rewarding paradigm happen at the very beginning, similar to how you're going to reward later. So a variable interval schedule is after an unpredictable amount of time, you will receive a reward. Variable ratio has the most rewarding and consistent and response rate. So oftentimes we want to use a variable ratio, but variable interval that produces moderate and steady responses as well. So when we talk about a variable interval schedule, an example would be fishing, where you go to a body of water. There has been evidence that in this body of water, there are fish, which would be the reward, that thing that we want. Some people go fishing just for sport, and so they fish for the fish, but they release them back out once they catch the fish. And other people fish because they're fishing for the reward of food. So we go out fishing, but we don't know how long it's going to take, how much time it will take to get that reward of the fish. It's going to be a variable amount of time. So the variable interval schedule, and we can have some kind of fixed variable interval schedules as as well. If we think over a varied amount of time, I'm going to talk about that in a second. Over a varied amount of time, if we are in a variable interval schedule of 30, it may be anywhere from a minute to 30 minutes in terms of the reward, or a minute or 30 seconds until the reward is given, based upon the interval of time, not how many responses that the individual does in that period of time, but that based upon the amount of time, the varied amount of time that has passed. Okay, so if you see the pattern here with these schedules of reinforcers, they're all giving a reward in a certain type of way, but we're getting different responses in terms of how quickly, how steady, when the responses will increase and decrease based upon the schedule of reinforcement. So fixed duration schedule is behavior must be performed continuously for a fixed, predictable period of time. Okay, so fixed duration. So a fixed duration of time. The behavior must be performed, keep up that behavior during that whole period of time. So a rat runs in a wheel for 60 seconds to earn 1 pellet of food. So it's a fixed duration of 60 seconds. So the rat has to continuously perform for that fixed, predictable amount of time. Okay. Then we have a variable duration schedule. Behavior must be performed continuously for a varying, unpredictable amount of time. So the rat runs in a wheel on average 60 seconds to earn 1 pellet of food. So they must run between 1 second to 120 seconds, but it must be in that 60-second schedule. Okay, so it could be the first 60 seconds, the last 60 seconds, or 60 seconds in between the first and the last. But they have to run in that variation of the 60 seconds. Okay, versus the fixed duration, they have to run for the whole amount of time to receive the pellet of food. So think of the duration is the continuous amount of activity in order to get the response, but how much it may vary in terms of the amount of time, or it may be a fixed amount of time. Okay. So then we have what we call response rate schedules. And these are directly contingent on the rate of response. So duration schedules are based upon time, and response rate schedules are based upon responses. Okay. So we have differential reinforcement, DRH, DRL, and DRP. Okay. And the DR stands for differential reinforcement. One type of response is reinforced while another is not reinforced. Okay. So one type of response is reinforced while another one is not reinforced. So a differential reinforcement high rates, a DRH, is contingent upon responding at least at a certain number of responses in a certain period of time. So you have to respond in a certain period of time in a certain number of responses. And the reinforcement is provided for responding. Okay. So you have to respond when there's a certain number of responses within a certain period of time. Okay. So if you don't respond that certain number of responses in that designated period of time, then you're not going to get reinforced. So that's what one type of response is reinforced while another is not. Okay. So we talk about reinforcement for a high rate of responses, but not for a low rate of responses. So if you think of the person responding, maybe they are our certain period of time of our high rate responding is set. If they start responding in that period of time and they do it very rapidly, okay, they'll get rewarded. If they don't respond very rapidly, they won't get rewarded. Okay. So differentiation reinforcement at low rates is the minimal amount of time must pass between each response before the reinforcement is delivered. So this is steady as you kind of go, kind of pace to an extent. But the responses are at a slower pace, and the person must respond at the pace that we designate for them. Okay, so we can't respond during the interval. It says responding during the interval must not occur. So when we're having a differential reinforcement low rate, I will only get my reward if I respond in the minimum amount of time designated, and I must respond during that specific amount of time. If I respond outside of that specific amount of interval of time, I am not going to get the reward, even though I may be responding very highly. So think of it as I have a certain amount of time where I have to respond, and in that amount of time that I'm responding for my reward, it has to be slow and steady. I can't be like rapid. I have to be slow and steady. It must fit in the designated amount of time that the researcher has said the reward must be given. If I do anything outside of that, or if I respond really rapidly, I won't get my reward. And then we have differential reinforcement at a pace responding. And this is you get your reward that is based on a series or a set of respondings. Okay, so you can't respond too quickly and too fast, or you can't respond too slowly. It has to be steady and even, steady as you go. It has to be at a certain pace. If you're gang back busting out the gate, you're not going to get a reward. If you're moving a little too slow, you may not get a reward.